Great. So, welcome all. Today, we're going to have a look through, could the concept that could personality win the Rugby World Cup? Kind of already know to some degree my thoughts on the answer. So, across today, we're going to have a look at four things. We're going to have a look at four serious things around personality and the impact, certainly on rugby, but also on the World Cup. So we'll have a look at the first point. I'll talk you through the role of personality that plays in rugby and could potentially play out in the World Cup. The second things that we'll look at the critical areas of personality. So which areas of personality are important and likely to make the big difference on field. I'd love to share some stories. I've been lucky enough to work with the Waratahs for 3 or 4 years, with the World Cup campaigns for the Wallabies in 2007 and 2011. I've done a little bit of work with the Japanese team this year, but for the last 6 years I've been on contract with Sansa, working with the referees. So there's 3 or 4 guys that I know intimately who will be refereeing at the World Cup this year. We'll have a look at the impact of how personality can predict on-field momentum. So what we're knowing now from a rugby or competitive invasive sport perspective is that momentum leads to dominance and flow on field, which also leads to points. We can actually map from a psychoanalytical perspective about the impact that specific players have on momentum, and I'll share you a great story about how I was mapping that for Robbie Deans when he was coach of the Wallabies in a test match at Eden Park. And final thing that we'll actually have a look at is the impact of what I call the 31st man. So the impact of the personality of the referee and how it's likely to define the subculture of the game. This will either, if you're fascinated by this, which is what I am, and the subtle impact that the referee can have on the game, not so much about decisions, but very much so about interactions and the way that he lets the game flow and his interactions with the team. It can either be fascinating for you or can just ruin games. I say that with a smile on my face. So if we start with the role of personality in sport, I'd like to cover off 3 areas. I'd like to propose that this is a new frontier, that it's untapped, but certainly not just personality, but the concept of mental skills within elite sports is now on the rise, far more so than it was 10 or so years ago. I'd also like to talk to you about what it's not. So how it differs from, for those of you that are psychologists and executive coaches or consultants or counsellors, how it differs from corporate work and clinical work. And the third thing I'd like to talk about under this first point is what it is. So how do we need to adopt as the teams or the coach or the customer asks a lot from us. So they're the 3 areas in what the role of personality is. So looking now at the untapped frontier. All teams, bar 2, will actually take a mental skills coach to the Rugby World Cup. One of those teams that won't is Australia. We have a coach who believes that not only is he a great coach, but he's the sports psychologist also, so he doesn't need any help. And one of the smaller teams, Georgia, won't be taking a mental skills coach. The rest of the teams will be actually taking a mental skills coach. So we've got that as an emerging frontier. We're seeing more recognition and more requirement in sport for mental skills coaches than what was seen in the past. was fascinating. Back in 2014, I spent some time in America with the San Francisco 49ers. At that point in time, they had no team psychologists. At that point in time, that there was a new psychometric that was run through the combine draft, so their draft for new players. And I asked the head of football in 2014, how did they use the tool? He passed me across a sample and it looked like a very good tool. It covered off the 5 factors in quite good detail. And his response was that they wouldn't look at the tool for 2 to 3 years and then decide on what face validity they thought the tool provided based on their own experience back. To be honest with you, I was dumbfounded with that. And I then asked the question about who does their proactive mental skills work, just reminding us all again, this is 2014. And the head of football suggested to me that their pastor did their mental skills work. And I begged the head of football's pardon and said, what do you mean your pastor? Oh, the pastor goes out and asks the family, does little Johnny like to eat chocolate and have a little rub on the ear before he goes on? And if he does that, then that's what we do. That's our mental skills program. I responded at that point in time and said to him, wow, at the risk of actually being kicked out before the coffee comes here, what year is it? So that was 2014. There wasn't a NFL team that they knew of at the time that actually had a psychologist attached or a mental skills coach attached. They now, all NFL teams have it. So what we also know is that there are another reason why it's an untapped area in mental skills. So the breakthroughs in a technical and physical domain no longer create a competitive advantage. We've got such a fast-moving world nowadays. We've got a transient of strength and conditioning and SS&C personnel that move around. The information is so readily available. We've got video that's so readily available. Most of the technical and physical breakthroughs no longer give an overly long-term competitive advantage. The third point and third reason why I believe this is an untapped frontier at this point in time is that the resources of talent are limited. It would be lovely just to go and buy any piece of talent that we would like. But unfortunately, those days are well past. And so we're coming to the stage where we're actually saying, how do we get the most out of the talent roster that we've got? How do we ensure that the team gels? Because no longer can we just go and purchase the most exciting players and hope that works. So for those reasons, that's the proposition that we really have an untapped frontier with respect to what we're looking at as far as mental skills, personality, and that finally being recognised for what it is and what it can be. It's very clear as we see now, and again, we're seeing a maturity again in the market, but here's what it's not. From my perspective, it's not just about a teaming, feel-good tool. I was at a Super Rugby franchise this year, and it was interesting watching them go through the line-out. This team is arguably the best line-out team in certainly in Super Rugby. It was interesting watching them walk through the line-out at walking pace. They did that for just over 90 minutes. They then went out and trained it slow motion on the field. They had 4 drones in the sky. They then trained it at full pace. They came back and did a hour debrief on it. This was pre-season, and I was speaking to the head coach, and I said, wow, what do you do with your mental skills? And he says, oh, we've got this great little program where everyone's a colour. And I said, what do you mean everyone's a colour? Oh, we work out whether someone's purple, they like detail, yellow, they like high level. And he said, that's all we do. And it was an interesting discussion to say, wow, you're the best in the world at the line out, and I've just watched you spend 6 hours on it. But you quarantine and mental skills down to whether someone is a lion, a mosquito, or some colour. I said I find that really kind of interesting. So So I think, so what it's not just I don't see it as an incredibly simple tool. I think if we need to be serious, we need to be demonstrating a thorough program of analytics around it to combat things that they do technically with analytics and also with the strength and conditioning programs. I think it's another thing. It's not a process of clinical solutions for confidentiality. Most high performance managers and head coaches that I speak to are reticent to allow, and I'm in inverted commas, a registered sports or clinical psychologist in because of their fear of driving a wedge in the playing group around confidentiality. I understand, and I'm the same, that if you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Player welfare is not the same as performance. We're starting to certainly see that here in Olympic programs here, and nothing drives the high performance manager more insane than fractured teams and relationships because someone's having confidential information. The way that I've always worked, that I was always frank and candid with my work with playing groups and athletes, and also told them that I'd be letting the coach know about the not so much about the detail of our discussions, but about the trend of our discussions and what we're talking about. And short of them telling me I don't want you to share it with anyone, I would fairly well share the conversation so that there's an open playing field. Final point about what it's not just about breathing, preparation and visualization. Look, every athlete, I believe, could do this better, but in most cases, there's little return on those areas. I'm looking at actually understanding personality. So how do we actually make an allowance for that in gameplay? How do we go and observe gameplay through a personality lens? How do we predict what relationships will and won't work through a personality lens? I've looked at it very much from a performance on-field perspective. And yes, breathing, preparation, visualization is useful, but for me, some of that doesn't necessarily lead to on-field performance. So moving on now to kind of, well done, Warren. You've told us everything. It's not. What what is this? Look, I see it very much as a lead indicator and team positional fit. Let me explain. So. I use the Hogan tool, and I know that it's a top end range tool. I'm sure that there are lots of other tools. I'm accredited in about 20 360-degree psychometrics. All of them are very good instruments. The reason why I use the Hogan tool for a couple of reasons. First of all, I believe it's credentialed incredibly well. I would never take a inferior tool and use it in one of the teams that I work with or have worked with on the basis if someone asks, or we should assume that the media will start asking questions. So I always want to pull to a really, really credible tool. The reason why I like the Hogan tool is that it looks at three things. So it looks at the motives, values and preferences from an individual perspective. It looks at how an individual is likely to behave, which is your standard five-factor tool. And it also looks at what's an individual likely to do under stress and pressure. The benefit of the motives, values and preference inventory is that it can actually, it gives us an indication into the intrinsic values of individuals, and because Hogan is numeric, we can aggregate up to groups. So it can give us really good insights into alignment at the intrinsic value levels, which actually goes to fit. So we can also look at the second point here. It can also give us a predictor of on and off field derailment. It's fascinating. Most coaches know, from my perspective, about when a player is derailing. They don't know the actual lead indicators to a player derailing. Just to give you a bit of an example, a rugby story. I was when I was with the Waratahs a few years ago, I said to the backs coach, "Hey, what's the fullback do in the second half? What happens to him in the second half?" And he said to me, "Oh, you mean between the 48th minute and the 63rd minute?" And I said, "Well, I didn't know it was that refined, but yes, let's go with that." And he said, "Look, he just totally loses it. He tries something overly clever. That doesn't work. He then tries to make up for that with something even crazier and more innovative. And when that doesn't work, he actually just goes missing on the field." And I said, "Well, so we know that he does that. What are we doing about actually helping him to find a solution for that?" And they said, "We don't know what to do." So I went back to the profiles and saw that that player was high learning. So I said, "We better take some clips with us." And he was also, in Hogan, they actually talk about high imaginative, which is overly creative and eccentric under stress and pressure. And we took some clips and asked the player, was he aware of what was going on? And he said, "No, not really." Played some clips and he said, "Does that make sense?" And he said, "Yes." And I said, "What's going on for you at that moment?" And he said, "Look, I'm not proud to say this," but he said, "I feel like I get bored." I said, "Okay, great." And then I said, "What happens when you get bored?" He says, "I just try something that would be a bit of fun, my favourite reverse banana kick." And I say, "Is there any chance you've trained that?" "No, I never trained that." "Great, you just try to just think about doing it in a game." "Yep, because I'm bored, it'd be a bit of fun." And I said, "What happens when that doesn't work?" He said, "I try even a more creative one to make up for my last mistake." And he said, "By then I've got nothing." And I said, "Okay." Just one simple thing I asked him to do. I said, instead of trying to kick the ball 60 rows long, could you actually kick the ball 60 rows deep? So when you get bored, could you just kick the ball deep instead of long? Just do a boring kick. He said, "I could do that." And I said, "Great, let's actually, give you some feedback around that." Long story short, that extended his contract by 2 years because they'd had enough of him going missing in the second half. Final thing here around about what it is, it's a guide for the coach engagement and how to train and reward and recognise the teams. Very much so, we can establish the styles of learning. We can establish how groups and key individuals also like to be rewarded and recognised. So for me, that's what it is. It's a tool that provides us clinical objective data where we can gain indications of fit, predict behaviour on field, and also how for the coach and the coaching group to engage. Looking now at the three critical areas for coaches and key players to get right. Look, my perspective is it's not all that important that all players love the tool or love the process. There are key players in the team, and I said to a rugby coach recently, "Who's the most important player in your team? Who touches the ball the most?" And he said, "My number 9." And I said, "Who's the craziest player in your team?" He said, "My number 9." And I said, "Well, is that really what you want?" He said, "No." He said that player, that number 9 is man of the match every week. The problem is he's only man of the match for us every third week. He doesn't play well the other 2 weeks. I think there's a strong need for the coaching group and key players to be really aware of the following three key areas. So the first one is around team fit plus coach and key messaging. I watched a new coach say to the team, and it's interesting. So if we talk psychometrics for a moment and we talk the Hogan tool, the new coach was scored 100% on affiliation. So really believed and had success in building team, networking, collaboration, building a family. So he got up at the first meeting when he addressed the team as a new coach and said, "Look, what I think we'll do is we'll come back to after we've played at the stadium on a Friday night or Saturday night. Obviously, we'll do this just when we're in Sydney. We'll bring the families around. We'll have a barbecue. We'll start to build community. We can share. We can network. We can get the wives to meet one another. Get the kids to play together. Just build a really, really collaborative group and really build a family." and the captain actually, whose score for affiliation was under the 10 percentile mark, stood up and said right in front of the group, just turned his back on the coach because he was in the front row, stood up and said to the team, just ignore that. That won't be happening under my watch. And I've had enough of you guys by the time we played, and I'm not in any way having anything to do with my family. And just turned around and sat down. Well, I just thought that was hilarious. There was the coach demonstrating his high need for affiliation building networks and community, and there was the demonstration from the captain about how that really wasn't important to him. Funny to say, the coach didn't enjoy my sense of humour about that example. A couple of other examples about why coach fit is incredibly important with respect to the playing group. John Gruden, as an example, as an NFL coach. John was fired by the Oakland Raiders and went down to coach the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He was an incredibly critical, cynical, cranky, put the players down, would push them out of the way to show them how to do things. In today's world, he probably wouldn't make it, but 20 years ago, he actually was the youngest coach ever to win the Super Bowl. So there's a great example, and I'll give you another one in a moment, about how the criticalness of actually getting the coach to align with the group, with what the group needs, is absolutely critical to get high performance. So we've got another example, a guy by the name of Dick Vermeil. He's actually rated as the second best coach behind Vince Lombardi. Vince used to carry a box of tissues everywhere he went. He had the success of getting 3 separate teams to the playoffs over a 7-year period: the Philadelphia Eagles, the Kansas City Chiefs, and the LA Rams. And Dick would actually cuddle his players, cry, tell them he loved them, and hug them. So if we put aside just how we believe that that's sustainable for long-term relationships, which is what I agree, I'm wondering how that behaviour would have actually gone with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Would that have got the best out of them? And I'm pretty sure that Gruden might not have got the same success, as he was being overly critical, cynical, and argumentative with Vermeil's group of players. A really great local example for me is when Michael Checker came to the Waratahs. At that stage, they were probably a bit of a leaderless and rudderless group. Michael was incredibly strong in what he wanted them to do. He was incredibly binary about what was acceptable and what was not acceptable, to the point where you can only have so much of that. But again, if we look from a performance perspective only, he took that team to winning the finals. We then had Daryl come on board. Daryl's way more laid back, and arguably it hasn't worked under his leadership. So I'd really make the point here that the coach and the coaching group need to adapt to the team. We can't adapt to a team unless we've got some data and some analytics around the team. So we need to clearly understand what's the culture of the team, what drives the teams intrinsically, what drives the forwards, what drives the backs. So coach fit is going to have a major impact on performance and success, especially under pressure at the World Cup. Next thing is actually around looking at predicting key player decision making. So the things that I look for here are players that don't manage stress and pressure well. In Hogan terms, low adjustment. We want to know who's goal driven, who's not, who's interpersonally sensitive, what are they conscientious, are they adaptive to learning. So a couple of examples about what we've learned here. My experience is that the most in bracket talented, naturally gifted players tend to be low adjustment. So they tend to be expectations are high. They tend to be anxious. They tend to look back with regret. They tend to be a bit mistrusting. And of course, our dilemma is they're absolutely crazy and unpredictable on field. But of course, that then becomes a risk off field. I mean, from a role model perspective, we love how they run away quickly and unpredictable from the opposition, but we expect them to be librarians at off the field. Not the case at all. Also, my experience is again that a lot of coaches are goal driven. To be honest with you, most male playing groups that I've seen, this goes across cricket and also rugby union and rugby league. Most of those are not overly goal driven. You get the odd one that is. Most of them, and I suppose if we think about it, they've grown up incredibly talented from the age of 3. They've had their bags carried. Their parents have told them that they're actually going to be the next version of Johnny Wilkinson or Tiger Woods. And they've just been naturally talented, so they haven't had to work at things. So it's an interesting, again, disparity between which players are goal-driven and which aren't. Prudence and conscientiousness is another great example and a really great indicator around that. Most coaching groups I've ever seen are way more prudent and conscientious than playing groups. Forwards, from rugby union's perspective, are likely to be more conscientious and predictable. The backs, and no surprise, I would imagine, are a little bit crazy, windswept and interesting. So most coaching groups I've worked with, I've basically said, for goodness sake, you might want to dial down the planning or be really clear that you're doing that for yourself, not for others. Learning approach in the Hogan gives us a really great example also. When I first turned up at the Wallabies 10 years ago, we were doing a lot of stuff with clips on whiteboards and sitting around the classroom. Most players learn by doing. They're kinesthetic learners. I don't think that'd be a surprise to anyone. And so we then started to take plays and adjustments and learning outside. All simple things, but really, really key things to know so that we can look at how best to enable training so that the messages actually get to stick in. We also, a lot of playing groups are high power, high hedonism. They like challenges, but they like to have fun. So again, we brought that into the environment to ensure that we can maintain their motivation with the environment. Really interesting, another key thing that from a personality perspective that we can find, and the big 5 factors give us this, is to give us some expectations of potential runway for a lot of the areas that we're looking at. How calm will an individual be? How best do they learn? Are they innovative? Do they value relationships within the team? Are they loners? And the thing that I find is when you provide a piece of objective data to a coach, it enables them to make a unbiased decision. My first year with the Waratahs, at the end of the debrief, the doctor did the review and put up all the injuries across the year, and I looked at the list and I said to the doctor that we should have been a bit closer together. 60% of the people that she had on her list for soft tissue injuries, I had on a watch list for low adjustment, low prudence. They were likely to do anything. We had one of our key players who was very exciting to be around, but not well adjusted, decided to race the quickest player in the team in the car park with no warm-up and no shoes on one day prior to training, and pulled a hamstring, was out for 6 weeks. So from that moment on, the doctor and I worked really, really close together about trying to get ahead of situations. We did a lot of work around what do players need from an injury recovery perspective, who was likely to stick with injury recovery plans, who was likely not to, who was likely just to lay on the table and tell the doctor that they weren't going to do any work and it was up to the doctor to fix. And also players that were away for an extended period of time, about how to integrate them back into the playing group. So this getting a real insight into not just personality and to some degree there were elements of this we didn't share with the playing group. That wasn't that important. It was more so the key decision makers, and for some players it was important, but mainly I was very judicious about who we allowed to have the information. Third points around this is potential clash points. So we, and I can talk about it now, the Waratahs as an example. When I was there, we had Curtly Beard and Luke Burgess together, and they were almost identical. Their data scores, out of which we've got 30, we were looking at 33 key data points. They had something like 15 or 16 that were identical scores. And so we had exciting and unpredictable at number 9 and exciting and unpredictable at number 10. The combination never worked. So it was a recommendation I made to the captain and the coach about moving a more considered player, a calmer player who would actually follow and be present, the number 9, who was Luke Burgess at the time, rather than Curtly Beard, who was exciting and unpredictable as Luke was. And it really changed the way that they actually fed the back line. Another thing we found is a derailment can be predicted. If you know the patterns, then you can actually see the first steps of when it's occurring, not so much when it's when the milk is spread all over the floor. I'd like to give you an example, again, a Waratah story about how this kind of played out. I asked the analytics guy, they were an interesting team. They always seemed to win by 10 or lose by 10 when I was there. And I asked the analytics guy, when was the last time they put 50 points on another team? And they said, he came back and said quite proudly, that was 5.5 years ago. I was shocked. I went back and looked at the psychoanalytical data, found out, no, it sounds simple, but it took a while to get to the point that under stress and pressure, the forwards were highly cautious. Under stress and pressure, the backs were highly excitable. The penny dropped for me. I called the coaching group together and I said to them, here's the 2 graphs. You don't need to worry about the graphs there for me. Highly excitable, highly cautious. You don't need to be playing another team. You're actually playing yourselves. So we've actually got the accelerator and the brake. We've got half the team is actually fearful of making a mistake. The other one is so starved of the ball that they do silly things when they get it, which then reinforces the forwards that they should never have given the ball to the backs. There wasn't a word from the coaching group. There wasn't a question. The only question that the head coach at the time, Michael Foley, said to me is, what are we going to do about it? And I said, come with me and let's go and have a chat. We found Phil Waugh, who was the captain at the time and ran the forwards. And I said to Phil, do you know how you don't give the ball to the backs because they do stupid things with it? And he said, yep. Well, he could have knocked me over with a feather. And I we had a discussion for about 10 minutes. If they were more conservative, would he give them the ball? So he made an agreement around that. Went and found Berwick Barnes, who ran the backs. Said to Berwick, you know how you don't get the ball, Berwick? He said, yep, Warren, does our heads in. We had a bit of a discussion around that. And I said to him, could you hang on to it a little bit longer instead of kicking it away? Could you get the feel of the ball? And if you get bored, could you pass it to someone that you know, again, rather than kicking the ball away? He had a bit of a smile on his face, and we took Berwick to Phil, and I said, right, Pinky promised me and Hug, whatever you guys do to actually get a commitment around this, you've agreed that you're going to be more conservative when you get the ball, Berwick. Phil, you're actually going to give them some more airtime with the ball. Do we have an agreement? They both agreed, and I said, right, let's train it. I was totally unsure what I meant by them, but I sounded incredibly confident. Let's train it, and I'll come to training and watch, not knowing what I watched. So I turned up at the stadium on the following weekend, and here's actually what happened as a consequence of that. The team played the South African Lions, was the highest score at the time. They put on 73 points. There were 6 club records broken that night. The highest winning margin, 73 points to 12. Most tries in the game, they scored 11. Drew Mitchell got 4 for himself, and which was a club record. And Berwick kicked the most club conversions of 9 on that night. So over and all, and we couldn't have got to that. It was recognised that we couldn't have got to that unless we knew the data. So again, we're looking about how does this impact on field? How can we take this as a proactive insider lens to look through? I'd like to share a quick story about how it leads to momentum. What we know is that if we understand key players and we understand how they view stress and pressure and how they view the game, we're able to map predictable momentum swings. In 2011, when the Wallabies played the All Blacks at Eden Park and got a beating, it was interesting. We had Luke Burgess in the team at the time, and in my opinion, and I wrote to Robbie Deans, texted him during the game, and I said, I think Luke's game is over immediately after the kickoff. 7 seconds into the game, Luke went to pass it to Drew Mitchell. Drew wasn't there. Luke got smashed in a tackle and never recovered. I counted that there were 23 momentum swings, i.e. bad passes, bad decisions, bad kicks, momentum limiting pieces of play, 23 that the Wallabies had created for negatively towards themselves. So they created 23 for the All Blacks and only 12 for themselves. So it was no surprise that they'd won. I also found it really interesting that when one negative momentum swing was followed by another one in under 90 seconds, on every occasion the All Blacks scored. Now, no kind of rocket science around that. If you make 2 mistakes in a row, a great team like the All Blacks is likely to take you out. The interesting thing is, out of the 23 negative momentum swings or positive momentum swings that the Wallabies created for the All Blacks, Luke Burgess created 12. So again, we can look at impact of key players if we know what we're looking for on the field. Luke didn't have a good game, and there was some serious work that needed to be done with Luke. Okay, having a look at the things that I've done a lot of work with over the last few years, the 31st man. This is how it played out. There was a Bledisloe Cup a couple of years ago that ended up being a draw, and I was asked to attend the game and provide feedback to the referee. And what we know about the referee from a personality perspective: high power, loves a challenge, loves to be in a challenging environment. High security, very, very predictable, safe pair of hands. High prudence, very process driven, gets very perfectionistic. Pretty well just described every referee, to be honest with you there. And it was a 12-all draw, and I spoke to the referee after the match, and he said, how did you think I went? And by the way, the media were not kind to him, as he basically choked the game. And I said to the referee, I actually agree with the media. I agree with it. I agree with what people are saying. And he said to me, when do you think I lost it? When do you think that I started to derail? And I said to him, I believed you were derailing prior to the game. You actually wrote in your pre-game that it was going to be a tough game. You actually went into the sheds and told the teams it was going to be a tough game. And you were already over-aroused and over-pre-primed. And when I said to the referee, what we know about you is that you then get too technical, too close to the action. Your head was in every breakdown. You weren't standing back far enough. You couldn't see the space. You basically choked the oxygen out of the game. And I said, go back and have a look at the game through that lens. He was really great. He came back and said to me, you're absolutely right. I had no idea that I was so wound up and so pre-primed. And I entered that game into a very, very subtle derailed space, which had a major impact on space and ball availability in that game. So what we look at for the 31st man, we really get really clear, are they game ready? Are they game ready technically? There's not too much of a problem with that. Are they game ready with respect to a team of four? Enormous amount of work has been done around this, around feedback, communication, not just with the TMO, but also with his assistant referees. Is he across the teams? And where is he at personally? What's his rhythm for the game, and is he in a good space for that? We actually make sure there's a real clarity of roles. We get them to be quite prescriptive on what they want from each of their support and assistant referees, and we get quite prescriptive around on-field comms. There's a process we actually have them follow. It's interesting where we're changing now with half-time review. We're actually asking them not to go through the technical elements of the game, but to actually view the game as if they were looking at it from the stand. What are they seeing? And we get them to talk about, how's the game going? Normally they would go, how's the scrum? How's the line out? How's the space? Who are the problem players? So they would do a ground up assessment. And of course, they would get lost in the detail. We now sit in reviews at halftime where we kind of go, how's this game going? Is there anything different we need to do? How do we feel like we're working together? And then we say, is there anything we should be looking at or expecting in the second half? If a team's down 40-0, we'll probably be expecting that they'll come out of the gate, and we need to be mindful about foul play around that in the first 10 minutes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we've enabled them to look at those elements. That pulls through onto, so if you're having a look at any games in the World Cup, have a look at how they set standards, because the teams will take the lead on that. Are they consistent with the expectations that they set? So we look for consistency right across the game because the teams are looking for that. The teams don't want to have to work out, has the referee changed? Is there something new for us to understand here? Are they connected and engaged? We are absolutely critical on their ability to be connected with the game. Are they giving the game what the game needs? Are they creating a platform for the best players in the world to play? We no longer assess them, are they technically correct? And my favourite one is, can they actually get behaviour change without blowing the whistle? What we know is that our best referees are a good adjustment. They love a challenge. They're high power, and also they're happy to take risks. What we know is that low adjustment, low prudence, high excitable referees just don't make it. We had one of those in our ranks 3 years ago, and had a really good run, then had a bad game and could not recover from the bad game in following games. Just totally lost it. And one of the coaches actually said to the head of referees, I don't want that referee ever again, because he spends more time managing himself than actually managing the game. And I said to the coach of the referees, I said, that's a problem if they know where to look now. So a really great example of a guy by the name of Glenn Jackson. Glenn won't go to the World Cup this year, where there was a pulling down out of the line out. This was 10 minutes into a game. He called out the captain. He warned the captain that the next time that happens, the player is off. He warned the whole team, and then he warned the specific player. Literally 5 plays later, the exact same player did the same thing. And it was interesting listening to the commentators, and even the commentators were saying, well, he's off to the bin. And they were looking for the player. They couldn't find the player. And the commentators were even joking about how he was hiding out on the wing. So this is about how do we actually set up, clear expectations and stay connected and create a platform for the best people to play. I'm just going to stop there and field any questions that you guys might have, because I'm very, very mindful of our time. We've got about 8 minutes before the hour, and I could be here for another hour just chatting to you about the fascination and the things that I've learned, and the enormous power of getting some objective data, getting some coaches on board who are really interested in actually learning, not so much about, I don't want them to learn about psychology. I want to be able to enable a framework where we can interpret and connect with the things that they see, and we can provide some solutions. So, questions, thoughts, comments?
Thanks, Warren. That was really, really insightful. There was one question from Gerda right in the beginning, where she just asked whether we will be receiving the recording, and yes, that will be made available after the session, along with the slides, if that's not already sent through. And for anyone else who wants to type a question, go to your little question box and click send to all, and we'll respond there. Warren, so while we're waiting for if there are any questions, let's not put the people
Sure.
too much on the spot. I know Yanni asked you yesterday, but perhaps we can ask you today again in terms of your predictions for the coming World Cup.
Look, for me, it's Ireland. I think Joe Schmidt's got them in the right place at the right time. He's incredibly insightful about how he manages his people. He's incredibly insightful because I'm doing some stuff with the referees. He's incredibly insightful. He gives an appraisal of the referees that we're capable of giving. So I think his team's going at the right place. Of course, my second choice is the Springboks, of course. But I think Ireland, from a million, without a ball being kicked at the moment, and I could look incredibly foolish very soon. But I think Ireland, for me, are going to be tough to beat. So for me, it's about what momentum a team's bringing in. It's interesting around. You've got New Zealand. It could be the last hurrah. Obviously, Steve Hansen's kind of going. Eddie Jones is staying with England, so we'll see where they're up to. But I think Joe's got a point to prove, and he's got a good he's got some good momentum and a good tribe around him. So yes, so I'm happy to pin my my flag to that mast at this point in time.
Interesting. Thank you. So it doesn't seem like we've got questions. Elke just mentioned on the chat, no questions. Just thank you for a fascinating presentation and for sharing your insights. So
great. And I'd really challenge us as we watch, the World Cup. Look for the repeating patterns, and I'm not talking about the plays, but look for the repeating patterns that actually kind of go on. Look for the momentum swings and how they're created, and is there a consistency from who creates that? Look at the way that the referee manages the game, and not technically, but does he provide clarity? Does he provide confusion? What we assume at SANZAAR and World Rugby, that if there's in any way any form of fisticuffs or any form of that physical fighting that goes on, that's caused by frustration that started ages ago, and it's the referee's fault. That's what we assume. So it's fantastic looking at a game through a lens of cause and effect. And of course, by the way, grab some of your favourite beverage, grab a lovely pinotage and watch the game and enjoy it. But to gain some insights into the structural dynamic that goes on that makes the game a great game.
Very, very interesting. Warren, we've got a question here from Monique. Do you think there are certain personalities that make great or successful players?
What a great question, Monique. Look, I think that there's definitely some yes around that. I think it comes down to quite positional play. I've done quite a bit of research with Hogan corporately, and if I can use a corporate example, what makes someone a really great finance person is going to make them a lousy salesperson. So if I like to, and apologies for anyone that's done accounting in the room, and I've done some, so I put myself into this basket. Anyone that loves to sit in a room with no windows and fluorescent lights and have pizzas shoved under the door and does really well at that, is going to be uncomfortable consistently meeting new people and being overly challenged and having to be mischievous and innovative in the moment. So if I take that example, I think that there are some key, when you get game breakers who can change the game in a blink, you can actually see you can see that in their personality. Dave Warner, a great example in cricket for Australia, probably opening up a can of worms with that comment. But Dave, Dave's you can just see it's quite low adjustment, quite low improvements, quite high excitable. I don't think you don't need a psychometric to work that out. But it's his ability just to charge the bowl and make a rash decision, back himself, believe himself without any thought, that actually makes him a great player. So I think there is. I think it very much goes along the line with technical talent and also physical ability. I see those as Monique, as the three pillars. We've actually benchmarked, and refereeing's easier. We've actually benchmarked key psychological markers that we push down into the countries looking for next talent. So that's part of the pathway. We've got a lot of technical indicators, got physical indicators. We now use psychological indicators also. That becomes part of the package. And if someone comes through and they haven't got that, that's fine, but we pay closer attention. And to be honest with you, personally, I'm yet to be surprised. The research and the data analytics that goes around the personality side of things I'm finding incredibly predictive.
Thank you very much. We've got a next question here. Yanni's asking, does personality play a bigger role in team sports or individual sports?
Look, I would probably say it depends. Look, if I had one answer, if I'm going to answer one, I'd say individual sports, because it's just down to one individual. So the good traits and the bad traits just have a greater impact. What I'd say from a team perspective, what I do know is and there was the Waratahs example. There's almost, based on the collective personality of the forwards, collective personality of the backs as an example, collective personality of the coaches. As an example, you take those groups which are just a collection. That the similarities and differences are obvious here. If you get a really, really important person who's got lots of power in the group, that can have an impact. If we're just talking about standalone individual, I would say individual sports. I do a lot of work in golf. Those guys are crazy, but you can really hone down and really show them at what point they're about to derail and at what point they're about to excel on the course. Because again, this is just about executing a task. And there are lots of examples where our personality gets in the way, where we actually go to, where we preference our orientation and who we are in the world over execution of tasks. That's the bit I find fascinating, where I choose to prove my beliefs about the world, self and others, rather than me executing the task that's in front of me. So individuals are way much easier to plan and predict for. The team stuff is, it can be a bit of, because we trigger off one another. It's like a good relationship, Yanni, and a bad relationship at home, I suppose, is the easiest way to put it.
Thanks, Warren. We've got another one. How much, again from Monique, how much do you think personal life and experiences affects the performance of a player? Read that badly.
Sorry, so could you just read that again?
My bad. Sorry, Monique. How much do you think personal life and experiences affect the performance of a player?
Great question. Look, I would, chicken and the egg, really, isn't it? If we know the individual, if we know the individual intimately, then we can actually better manage what goes in and around him. One of the referees that I work with doesn't referee well when he leaves his wife and they're all getting on well. He actually referees better when he's able to close out that relationship. Look, if I'm telling the truth, he actually referees better if he fights with his wife as he's walking out the door. So I think there's the stuff that's immediate around that it's immediate in their world, and I think there's obviously stuff that goes back, Monique, in history, which is from our childhood and growing up, which actually shapes and defines our personality and about how we make sense of the world and others. So in an immediate sense, it has if we understand the personality, then we can actually set the individual up for success. One of our greatest challenges in the area of mental skills is we've got to get out of our own way. It's not what I would like. I wouldn't recommend that he fights with his wife before he leaves, but he just referees better when he does that. So and there's nicer ways of actually, we've worked out ways that he can actually kind of close out the relationship so he can referee without regret. But it certainly comes from a long way back, and then we have to manage it so that they're absolutely game ready and not overstimulated, as the example was with that referee with the Bledisloe a couple of years ago. I'm not sure I've answered your question, Monique.
Nick, while you consider whether he has or has not, no, she says perfect, thank you. Thanks, Monique. We've got, looks like a last question from Nicola as well. So let me just find where to start. How important is it to have a good understanding of the technical aspects of the game to be able to have insights with regards to the influence of personality on performance?
For me, none. I'm assuming the golfer needs to put the ball in the hole. I'm assuming the goal of rugby is to put the ball over the other person's try line and stop them from doing the same. You know, I'm assuming that when you throw a ball into the line out, you're meant to come out with it. When you feed the ball into the scrum, you're meant to win it. When you go into a breakdown with the ball, you're meant to get it back. That's the level you need to understand. That's all you need. Matter of fact, any more absolutely confuses, because then it absolutely takes us away from the physical reality that's appearing in front of us, and that stops us from asking the question, isn't it interesting why this happens? Why is there a pattern? Why, if we can stay on the simple executable level, then we can actually see the patterns. If we see the patterns, we ask the question why. If we ask the question why, then the personality data can give us an insight into a potential why. Whereas if we get down into the weeds, the wind was blowing and therefore I don't hit my driver well, and this causes left to right, I'm not interested in that. There's a whole pile of uncontrollables for me down there. But if I can actually say to the guy, isn't it interesting, after you play well every Friday, you just have a terrible round every Saturday. And I don't care where you're playing.
That's very interesting. Thanks, Warren. It doesn't look like there's any other questions. If there are questions that come through afterwards, I'm sure we can forward it on by email.
Absolutely.
Warren, thank you so much. This has really been very interesting. And earlier in the comments, Gerda also mentioned, you know, it's going to make her watch the game from a completely different perspective. And I think that's true for everyone who attended this session. So thank you so much for making the time.
Pleasure.
And yes, hopefully we see you soon, and we'll see what happens in the coming World Cup. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks, guys. And email there, please. Any questions, just let me know. Thanks for the opportunity.
Awesome. Keep well. Have a wonderful day, everyone.